capturing the heroic efforts of people, unleashing the power of story on business challenges, and using the 5 strategies of change management. These topics are covered as Dr. Terry Paulson explains how leaders make change work. Dr. Terry Paulson is a psychologist and author of such popular books as Paulson on Change and 50 Tips for Speaking Like a Pro. A prominent platform presenter as well, Dr. Paulson is a member of the International Speakers Hall of Fame. Listen as Dr. Terry Paulson talks about how leaders make change work.
Today's session, leaders make change work. Everybody talks about change. Everybody knows they got to deal with change. You don't want to hear about change. You want to hear about making change work. What are the practical strategies you can use as a leader to make sure that happens? First key idea that I want you to remember is to cultivate the action imperative. How many of you have worked with companies where they substituted analysis for courage? They had a 9-year task force. How many of you have been involved? You go, by the time they figure out what to do, a competitor has already come out with a model that is far better and improved. Our job is to do our due diligence, but to get into motion. Once you're in motion, you have a chance to make the adjustments that are necessary. Winston Churchill, the right leader for very difficult and troubling times, said, "I never worry about action. I only worry about inaction." Because once people are in inaction, their doubts take over, their inability to assess and to establish a direction begins to take precedence, and we lose our focus. Once we're in movement, we can adjust. It's very much like skiing. How many of you agree when you're skiing, when you first learn, they taught you, oftentimes the snow plow was the term that was used here in the States. You would hold your legs apart and you would move slowly down this whole mountain. You paid to have a very poor experience. They no longer do that. Now they teach you that merely by waiting and increasing the speed, you increase the likelihood that you can traverse the mountain more effectively. Only with speed does that become possible. When you're in movement, you can get feedback from the world. The job of a good change leader is to keep people moving. Do your assessment, but get into movement so you can get feedback from your world. Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player. Early on, a coach who was frustrated with his lack of scoring pulled him aside after a frustrating evening. And he said, "You outskated everybody else out there on the ice, but you did not take a single shot on net. Miss some tomorrow night. You don't miss any, don't come back in here. You miss 100% of the shots you never take." How many times we get into a position where we're so afraid to move that we don't even raise our hand and participate. We were taught that in school. You remember that in school? Where you were afraid to raise your hand? You're thinking, is this profound or is it stupid? The line between profound and stupid is a very thin line. And by the time you've figured it out, somebody else has suggested your idea, or the agenda has moved to a new item. Our responsibility is to make sure that we share our ideas, that we take our risks, that we make our moves in making our vision happen. Second key point I want you to remember. Kill the myth of perfection. How many of you agree that quality is a very important part of competing in the global economy? You have to have quality products and services. It's like oxygen. Without it, you're not going to survive. And yet, if you become so focused on quality that you're not able to make the strategic risks that are necessary to move you forward, we will fall victim of being very good at something no one needs. Our responsibility is to manage that tension. I support the quality initiative. I work to try and establish best practices and learn. And we will continue to do that throughout history. But we have an equal responsibility to make it safe for people to have error. How many of you agree as soon as you're doing something new, error comes into the picture? I'll give you a quick little exercise. Take your left hand to your nose. Everybody, right now, left hand to your nose, right hand across left earlobe. This is position 1. Now I want you to move to position 2. Right hand on nose, left hand across right earlobe. This is position 2. Now that you've had training, I want you to stay with me on count as we go from 1 to 2 on count. Are you ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Okay, I suggest you stay in the jobs you have. I'm actually more concerned with those of you who stayed up with me because it proves you do it frequently, which is a very bad sign. You see, that's what training is like. I can tell you what to do. I can model it as I did. I can even let you practice it once. But when I moved you to full life speed, you faltered. And as a result of that, isn't that what happens in so much of learning? We go to a program and we learn wonderful things. But when we come back, we've got a desk full of new messages because we've been there. We've got emails to respond to. We've got all this stuff to do. And what happens is it's too easy for us to go back and do it the way we did it before. The challenge of leadership is making sure that when you move through change, you make room for error and you manage it. Hidden errors become big errors. How many of you would agree with that? It is our responsibility to surface errors early. The earlier I know about it, the less likely it is going to interfere with our ability that by the time we get to the customer with our product or service, it's quality. That's the challenge that we have to make sure that we do. Perfect leaders are intimidating. If you have to be perfect in everything you do, you know you do not always handle things well. So you'll have more of a tendency not to want to share your ideas. If everybody in the group begins to think that a certain way is the best way to do it and you're the only one who doesn't, you tend not to raise your hand. Our responsibility is to create an environment where people understand error is part and parcel of change. How many of you have people working for you that you are really glad you have? It's even changed your prayers. Every night you get down on your knees, let them live. We want to make sure we have these people. And if they perceive you as intimidating or always having to be right, they have to play games with you instead of realizing they can get the best ideas that are possible. Our challenge is to make sure that we build an environment that is safe to talk about errors. Third point. It is critical that we use error as course correction feedback. When you're driving a car at 60 miles an hour down a road, I don't care how straight the road, nor how effective or well-engineered the vehicle. When you're going 60 miles per hour, your hand has to go back and forth to maintain your course. You make course corrections. If you don't believe that, try it. Get a car, align the car, make sure that you're looking directly down the center of that road and accelerate to 60. You'll feel pressure to move your hand. If you don't move your hand, make sure you use a friend's vehicle. And you have an ambulance ready to pick you up when you go off of that road. That's when you're going 60 miles an hour. When a plane is going 600, they have to make those course corrections even more effectively. It's the same thing with making change work. We have to make sure that we're allowing the errors that we have to provide the course correction data to adjust our course as we move. That's the responsibility of leadership. I had one CEO who called me from South Carolina after attending one of my programs, and he said, I want to tell you what I did. I went back and I put $100 on the table with my top executives. And I said to them, I want to tell you about a mistake that I made last week and what I learned from it. He had never done that, so they knew he'd been to a seminar. He was acting bizarre. He then told them the error that he had made, and he said, the reason I'm telling you that is that I don't want you to make the same mistake. We lost a lot of money as a result of my decision. We don't need to have us lose the money twice. Then he looked at the $100 and he said, you're probably wondering what the $100 is for. That's for anybody who can top it. Now you have a basic trust issue. I could win the $100 and lose my job. This may not be a good deal. They went around the room. Each person shared a mistake in judgment they had made and what they'd learned from that experience. One of the managers in that meeting said, that's the best investment we have ever made in a meeting and any that we've ever had. You see, our responsibility is not to just talk about our perfect quality and all the best practices. We need to do that. But we need to surface and be comfortable looking at the errors. The change journey is very much like a car that has no reverse. You can't turn it off. There is no easy off-ramp. And you have to fix all flat tires while moving. That is why your rear view mirror is smaller than your front window. Can you imagine driving a vehicle with a huge rear view mirror and you have a little slit 6 inches to drive through? That would be an exciting drive. You see, what I think happens to too many companies and individuals when they look at change, they get preoccupied with the mistakes that they've made instead of thinking about the choices they have to make as they move out the front window. You as a leader must not only manage error, but use it to help you propel towards the vision and the mission that you've created. And if you're doing that, you're keeping people out of the past into the future. Whenever you're stuck in the past, that's in an area you can do nothing about. Our job as leaders is to keep people focused on what we can do to take advantage of errors to move us forward strategically and effectively. Fourth point, unleash the power of story. Story is what penetrates. The interesting thing is, you can tell me statistics, you can tell me about best practices, but when you involve a story about real people making a real difference, you connect to the lives of people. Unfortunately, what often happens in organizations is they have legendary stories that talk about the founding fathers of their organization, the founding fathers of their country. But we forget that as we go through change, you have to incorporate new stories that capture the new culture. If you are going to make change work, your job is to capture the story of change working and positively gossip about the people and the events that are shaping the culture that you're trying to create. Now, here's the challenge of this. The longer you've worked with people, the less likely it is you listen. How many of you agree? We count our computers oftentimes more than we do our people. I love my computer. I'm sitting at my computer and I'm working, and Nancy comes in. And she said, I need to talk to you. And I say, certainly. Go. And I continue to work at my computer. What am I saying to Nancy? You're not important. Look, I know I'm supposed to have an open door, but in spite of the fact that I have a closed mind, continue. You see, I honestly believe if I am not creating an environment where I give her passion for her ideas and her input, I am missing one of the greatest opportunities I have as a leader. 5 minutes listening to somebody else's excitement is one of the things that cements the change process in a positive way. Edith Wharton said, there are 2 ways of spreading the light: to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it. You see, as a leader, I come back from a training seminar and I'm excited about what I've learned. And I want to come back and I want you to share my excitement. But I have a lot of people that I need to influence. So I come back and I say, Pat, here's my light. I've been to training, and I want you to know I have new passion and excitement for my vision and the change we're going through. Do you share that, Pat? Take out your candle right now. All right, now would you light your candle? This is our candle for change. Do you feel excitement and passion?
Starting to.
Starting to. I can sense it in you. Now, you just keep it up yourself, because I got people I need to excite. As soon as I leave, what's he going to do with a candle? Whew, God, I guess you had to be there. There's something wrong with this guy. You see, here's the interesting thing. If you have to be the motivation for your people, you're never there. If you're pushing and pulling people to change, you got a problem. My responsibility is, what if I was the mirror? What if when I came back from that training experience, instead of saying what I said before, I came up to Pat and I said, Pat, I went to a training session today. And I got to tell you, half of the time I was there, I was thinking about you. Because they were talking about some of the ways to make change work. And as soon as they mentioned those areas, I went to some of the things you're doing on your group and the fine work you've been doing on that project. And I kept thinking, I have a wonderful employee working for me who makes change work. And I just want you to know, continue to do those kinds of things. It's exciting. You see the difference? I'm excited about his performance. If we come back and we share stories from other companies, we're not going to get excited about the right people. The difference between being enthusiastic and generating enthusiasm is whose ideas you get excited about. Our responsibility is to make sure we're excited about our people. The first manager I ever had, best manager I ever reported to, his name was Jack Nichols. I was 17 years old. I was a lab technician. That was my title. I drove a truck. It was a construction project. I don't know why they called me a lab technician. Now I'm sure it was for funding purposes. It was my first job. And on that job, he came to me on Friday and he said, Terry, every week I take a walk with each one of my employees. Your day is going to be Friday. That was my first job, so I didn't want to pretend like I didn't know what managers did. You know, I figured it out now. They walk with people. So I'm walking with this guy, and he shares a very insightful question. He said, Terry, you've been here a week now. What's working for you? I remember looking at him like, what? What do we ask teenagers? That is not the question. We ask questions like, how's it going in school? We want them to get good at school because we eventually want them to leave. How's it going in sports? Maybe you'll get a scholarship or something. Are you on drugs? Seldom do we ask the question, what's working for you? I was glad we were walking. I'm walking with this guy, and I said, well, the guys taught me how to load the truck. We have very sensitive equipment, and that's been working. And he said, good, Terry, I'm glad you learned from the guys. But I want you to know something. When I first hired you, I knew there was something special about you. In fact, I expect to learn something from you this summer. I remember looking at him like, what? I felt like saying, you're in big trouble. This is all I know, and they told me this one. Talk to my mother. She knows I don't know anything. She'll give you an excuse note. That man ruined my summer. Because every single week he asked me that stupid question. And here's the interesting thing, just like school, because you know, my model for leadership prior to that was school. And you know what you learn in school? It isn't to be excellent in learning. You learn how to get from one class to the next. Isn't that what we learn? You learn how a teacher gives a test. First test, you study everything. Once you realize there's nothing from the text, what do you say to your friends? Nothing from the text. Burn them. You just studied the notes. The interesting thing about leadership is if all we're interested in is problems, that's what you get. Most leaders are problem-focused. Got any problems? Got any problems? Got any problems? No problems? Back to work. Nobody is asking what's working. By asking that question every week, he forced me to look at the issues and to struggle with my own sense of value. In fact, my best day was always Thursday, because if I got to Thursday and nothing had worked, my walk was Friday. I had to have something work on Thursday. Every week I had something to share. Twice that summer he said, Terry, I love that idea so much. Would you mind if we brought it up during the staff time? Now I was 17, you got to look cool. Sure. In that staff meeting, I thought he'd forgotten halfway through. Then he said to the entire group, you know, Terry came up with something the other day. In fact, he did such a good job of explaining it to me. I remember looking at him, no, I don't want to say it. He said, go ahead, tell them, Terry, what you told me. I was intimidated. I was 17 years old. The rest of them were old, 30, 31. And I remember looking at his eyes and encouraging eyes that he had. He is the best listener I have ever dealt with in my life. Because I believe when you're the mirror, you're listening to the input of other people. And you're allowing their excitement and passion to show. And then you positively gossip about it to everybody you talk to. When you go into other departments, you say, I got to tell you about what Pat's been doing, or Rebecca, or whoever the person is. Because when you start to create that, you create momentum for positive change. What are the stories you tell? What are the best practices that your people are teaching you that you can cement into your culture? You need new stories. Final point. Take more of the blame and less of the credit. More of the blame, less of the credit. Most leaders take more than their share of the credit and less than their share of the blame and wonder why people don't get excited. It is our responsibility to realize that when you're making change work, it's your people that are making it work. Our job is to make them look good. We tell the story, but in addition to telling the story, we also need to take responsibility when errors do occur. Because how many of you agree? We talked about it earlier. When you go through change, there are going to be times that you did a bang-up job and it still didn't work. In the medical profession, they have a term for that, heroic efforts. A team worked feverishly to save a person's life, and they still die. That doesn't mean a mistake was made. It may very well be that they did everything they possibly could, and they have to pat themselves on the back and move forward. If you do not support heroic efforts on the part of your people, I will tell you what they will come and say to you. It's not in my job description. Just have me do what I've always done. I don't want to take any new risks. If I'm going to get the heat every time something doesn't work, I only want to do what is safe. A lot of people don't want to be empowered because they're afraid they're going to get yelled at. I had one gentleman tell me, the best manager I ever worked for, first woman I reported to, second week on the job, he took the entire computer system down for the company. How many of you have had moments on your computer that were not user-friendly moments? Second week on the job, he's working in his computer, IT department, all of a sudden, oh. Shoot, he heard things coming out of other cubicles that were not constructive. He knew at that moment he had made a big mistake. He went to his boss and he said, I think I've made a big mistake. She, being approachable, easy to work with, said, I'm sure it's not as big as you think it is. He said, I think it could be bigger. At that moment, her eyes got big because she reported to a yeller. How many of you have had to deal with yellers in your life? These are people that whenever there's a mistake, they come back and yell and scream about it. She knew that if it was big, he's coming. So what did she want? She wanted information. Tell me what happened. He's giving information. Do you have any backup? No backup. Okay. What do you have? Into this conversation of problem solving comes her boss in low brain function. He was subcortical back here in the reptilian area. He's coming in. The whole system is down. His carotids were flapping. The guy who made the mistake is in the room with his boss, watching his boss get yelled at for his mistake. He's only been in the job 2 weeks. What's he thinking? I'm history. That's all I could think of. The only positive thought he had was, at least my resume is current. I won't even have to say I've been in this job. You know, a 2-week gap, they'll understand that. For 15 minutes, he watched as his boss got yelled at for his mistake. And not once in the 15 minutes did that woman even mention his name. How many of you would agree that would be tempting? You knew? All she would have had to say was, there he is! He's defective. Take him. She took the entire heat of that confrontation. Realize something. When you're inviting people to go through change, you're still responsible. You don't delegate that. At the end of 15 minutes, the big cheese finally ran out of steam and said to this woman, this mistake should have never even happened. And she said, it did. And I take full responsibility for that. That's my area of responsibility. And every minute we're spending here is time we're not getting the system back up. The big cheese leaves. Now, he is alone with her. His previous experience is that pain goes downhill, increasing speed and severity. He was expecting to be yelled at. Instead, the woman did not even look at him, closed her eyes, took a couple of deep breaths. A smile formed on her lips. She opened her eyes and looked over at him and said, don't do that again. He said, I almost died. I said, I'll never do that again. And she said, I'm sure you won't. In fact, if it did happen consistently, we'd have a different kind of conversation. But I want you to know something. We share in some of that responsibility. We made proprietary changes in our system. We may not have updated you on all of those. And I also want you to know how many times in the IT department I have to find out who made a mistake. You had the guts to come in here and take responsibility. You're the kind of person I want on my team. I'm going to need your help to get this thing back online. What do you think that man's level of commitment would be to that leader? He showed me his business card. I said, am I supposed to see something? And he says, oh, I'm glad you can't, because in the white space, every morning when I get up, I write the same thing in invisible ink. Servant. I would do anything for her because she stood up for me. Let's summarize the session. First, remember the importance of cultivating the action imperative. Stay in action. Only when you're in action do you get the opportunity to get feedback from your world that allows you to make the course corrections that are necessary. Secondly, kill the myth of perfection. Quality is important, but balance that with an equal emphasis on being able to manage error. There's going to be error whenever you go through change. Our job is to use that as data and feedback in the course correction process. Make sure you're cultivating and finding the positive story about what's working in the new culture you're trying to create, and honor your people by positively gossiping about their performance. And finally, learn to make sure that you take more than your share of the blame and less than your share of the credit. When you do that, we will make change work.